Look at all of these shiny faces here to talk about modern Stoicism. I am absolutely delighted to see all of you. In fact, it's a little kind of overwhelming. I mean, the screen has got lots and lots of faces on it. So happy to have all of you here. Um, you know, this is about you talking to each other. But we got a great presenter. We're going to talk about that a little bit this morning and get you introduced to him. I'll tell you what, let's make sure that your fingers are working. And I see some people are putting stuff in the chat, and I've got some new stuff on the screen. So let's go ahead and do that question first, right? Let's if you haven't told us where you're from, tell us where you are in the world, because people are from all over. Let's see. Memphis, Tennessee, Romania, the UK, Conifer, Colorado, Donegal, Ireland. I'm not going to get to read all these, by the way. And it doesn't mean that I don't love you. It just means there's a lot to read, and I'm not going to get to all of it. But I want you to get a chance to see that people are from all over the world. And that is really awesome. Nova Scotia, New Scotland. All right. Sacramento, California, in New Jersey, in India at the moment. Well, welcome to you all. Glad to have you with us. Let's show you what we're here to do. This is Conversations with Modern Stoicism, and what are we going to do? Today's agenda. Let's see. We're going to have a presentation from our pal Greg Sadler, who I just saw. Yep, I see him on the screen. I didn't lose him. I was a little worried there for a second, but he's here with us. We're going to do some group Q&A while Greg's talking. If you got some questions, you can stick them inside the chat. Then I'll post those along for you. And then we're going to do this thing we call breakout room. So that means we will grab you, put you into small group settings, and give you a chance to chat with and meet with each other. Again, I'm hoping you saw the stuff leading up to this. This is an exploratory thing. Be open to some new ideas, some great thinking from each other, and a chance to meet brand new people. But we are all over the place in our journey. Anyway, we'll do that. We'll have discussions. We'll come back out. We'll do a thing we call report out. We'll do that again. Hopefully, if I get this right, we'll get to do breakout rooms twice today while we're talking to each other. And as you hopefully well know, this is all put on by Modern Stoicism, and we're here to kind of help you get more practice inside your Stoic practice. Let me get Greg Sadler up here with me. I'm going to go ahead and add him to the spotlight. Poof. You should see two of us now. And then if I ask him to unmute, I might get that as well. And then Greg, just to make sure I don't screw anything up, I'm going to make you a co-host, and that's just so you can mute and unmute yourself as you wish as you go along the way.
How's
All
it
right.
sounding?
I can see you. I can hear you. You look great. Audio is good. The video is really good. By the way, we're going to do this again, folks, but I want to give you a chance to practice applauding, by the way, for Greg, because, we're going to be doing this anyway. But I just thought this is kind of a cool idea. See how it works for you. So what we're going to do is going to applaud Greg. Yeah, you can do a little thing. I like that. Lydia's got that up on the screen. You can do it with the reactions button. Little applause button is right there. But you can actually take your hands and pat against the people on the sides of the screen, right? No. See, this is yay. And this is, I'm applauding. I'm high-fiving the people beside me on the screen. So hang out with them. Give them the high five. Greg Sadler, where in the world do we find you today? I think I know, but why don't you tell everybody?
Well, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I've got my 414, our area code here, shirt on. So Milwaukee, just north of Chicago. I think that's probably the place that people know the best, but, smaller, but more hip city than the big, windy one.
Listen, I've been to Milwaukee. I've had some good times in Milwaukee. So I know the place that you're talking about. And I think it is fun. I was in an even smaller town on that particular trip. I was in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. And you pronounced it right.
Yeah, right.
That's something that's a real challenge for people not from the area.
Yeah. Well, I was in Oconomowoc, and I was there, and I hit Milwaukee, and then, of course, hit some other places while I was around there. But I was up there for a show. I was actually speaking at something, oddly enough, in Oconomowoc years and years ago. This is it, Greg. And I know I didn't warn you ahead of time. I was going to ask you this, but you are really good at thinking on your feet. And I'm going to guess that you've had a chance to think about answers like this in the past. So here it is. If you could have any philosopher, dead or alive, as a podcast guest on your very popular podcast, and have them answer questions for a couple of hours, who would it
Mm,
be?
I've never been asked that one. That usually it's like, if you could go to dinner with somebody.
I don't want to go to. I don't want to watch
Yeah,
people eat.
yeah,
Here's my problem. I just don't. I don't like watching me eat. I don't want to watch someone else eat. But you ask good questions.
yeah,
You get
yeah.
to talk to people. So who would you like to ask some questions? Maybe get them to fill in some spots that you got questions about.
So there's a guy who doesn't get read very much, but I'm a huge fan of, and his name is either Leo or Lev Shestov, and he was a Jewish Russian philosopher who sort of saw the connections between these early existentialists like Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, and he had to flee to Paris eventually, which is where he finished out his career. And he is a really funny guy the way he writes, and
Hmm.
he's not committed to any particular school of philosophy, so he can kind of snipe at whoever he wants to. And I think that just judging by his books, he would be a really interesting person to bring on and chat with. And you never know what he would actually say.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I knew you were going to come up with somebody I'd never heard of before and knew nothing about. So now you're going to lead me off into some pattern of discovery. I'm going to have to go find this cat. But you also made it clear that you were in it for a good time. It was someone who's going to give you a laugh and maybe make you think, but that was going to be fun. And I'm all about that. So
Oh,
good
good.
for you. All right. Hey, Greg, are you going to show slides or not? I don't think we had
No,
that
I don't have
conversation.
any slides.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do, my fine friends. I'm going to introduce Greg Sadler, and he's going to talk to you for about 10 or minutes or however long he needs. And then we're going to come back and ask him a couple of questions together. And then we're going to send you off into rooms with some questions that he's prepared ahead of time for you guys to contemplate together. So that's what's going to happen today. Let me just go ahead and introduce you. How about I do that?
Sounds
And I'm
good.
going to read this because I don't want to get any of this wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the very accomplished Gregory Sadler. He's a philosopher, experienced educator, and dynamic speaker. With an impressive career spanning 2 decades, Greg has taught and designed courses in philosophy, humanities, religious studies, and critical thinking. Having returned to his hometown of Milwaukee in 2015, Greg and his partner, Andy, have become catalysts for intellectual engagement, organizing humanities and philosophy centered groups in the greater Milwaukee area. Greg holds an MA and PhD in philosophy from Southern Illinois University Carbondale, and his scholarly contributions have spanned the history of Western philosophy, with publications ranging from books to articles and encyclopedia entries. I should probably ask more about that. His dedication to making philosophy accessible to the public is evident through his appearances on podcasts, radio shows, and television, as well as his popular YouTube channel with over 65,000 subscribers and millions of views. Beyond academia, Greg puts philosophy into practical use through his private practice, Reason.io, where he offers philosophical counseling, executive leadership coaching, and ethics consultation services. He is the former editor of Stoicism Today, serving from 2016 to 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Gregory Sadler, a scholar, educator, and philosophical practitioner whose contributions have enriched the lives of many. And he's also my colleague on the advisory board of Modern Stoicism. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Greg Sadler. Just like this, grab like that.
Thanks.
All right, you
That's a
got it,
very
pal.
Yeah. So this is a topic that I've been thinking about for quite a long time, and part of it is spurred by group discussions in face-to-face groups or in presentations, and then comments that you get on various videos or posts or podcast episodes. And I think it's something that a lot of people get mixed up about, and they end up advocating or adopting positions that we could call quasi-stoic. They're drawing on stoicism to some degree, but they're not really stoic, and they wind up making mistakes with these important matters of what we do with other people and the things that happen to them. And so, when Phil pitched this, given this opportunity to lead a conversation with modern stoicism, of all the different topics that came to mind, I thought this wasn't, I don't know if it's the most important one, the most pressing one, but it's definitely up there in the top 5, I would say. And it came to mind for me because I had somebody who weighed in I think it was a YouTube post. I was posting about something I'd written in Medium, and it was about this topic of, what do we do when bad things happen to other people? And we're looking at it from a Stoic perspective. And this person was very angry that I could say that bad things actually happen to other people. And they had this view that we're going to explore in just a minute, that it's really none of your business, and who are you to call something bad? It's not affecting you as such. And so I started thinking about, yeah, this is a good topic that we need to get into. And I think it's a perennial topic. It's one that will come up for people over and over again long after all of us have passed on. So, if we think about goodness and badness from a Stoic perspective, there's a lot of passages in Stoic authors and literature that, if you read them in isolation, they sound as if goodness and badness are only to be found within a person and what's up to them. So, you may read the summaries of Stoicism: virtue is the only good and vice is the only evil, which isn't actually technically true. There's a lot more involved in that when we dig into the text, but some people will say that. And Epictetus even says things like that: only virtue and the virtues are genuinely good, only vice and the vices are genuinely bad. Everything else is indifferent. This is in Discourses 125. And then, Epictetus actually talks about a discourse that anybody could give about goodness and badness in book 2, chapter 9. Good things are virtues, and everything that participates in the virtues. Now, notice that it's not just the virtues anymore, it's what participates in the virtues. And evil are the opposite. Indifferent are wealth, health, reputation. I think we're all probably familiar with these sorts of passages. Epictetus also tells us, a human being's good and evil lie in what he calls proeresis, which is often translated as the faculty of choice or moral character, or there's a bunch of other things. Sometimes will is what people translate it as, and all other things are nothing to us. And so, when you read stuff like that, and when people put stuff out like that, I think this is one topic where it's really important not to screw ourselves up by being the equivalent of a fundamentalist proof texter, somebody who just looks for isolated little passages or sound bites or memes, because Stoicism is a really rich and complex philosophical system, and practice is essential to it. Practice not just by ourselves, but in relation to other people, and so is committed and continual study of Stoic texts. So if we think about this mistaken point of view, right, it's drawing on things that are coming from Stoicism, but it's turning them in a way that goes against the rest of it. So a lot of people would say Stoicism is focusing just on what is up to you and ignoring or putting aside what is not up to you or is up to other people. And so technically, this is what is in the scope of the proeresis, or in your own power. And so we see things like, being harmed, being insulted. We should distinguish the reality of that from our judgments or our assumptions that we're actually being harmed or insulted. And if we do that, we avoid these bad emotional states. And the Stoics have a whole bunch of these, anxiety, anger, sadness. And why? Because these stem from wrong judgments about matters. And so, how do we do this? We treat everything that isn't indifferent as just being completely indifferent, not making a difference, not having any genuine good or evil to it, just being preferred or rejected, perhaps, but those are lesser terms. Now, what happens to other people when we do this? Other people, strictly speaking, and what's going on with them is not within the domain of our choice or proeresis, and it's technically speaking an indifferent to us. So the people that we're closest to and care most about, in a way, if you think about Stoicism this way, if bad things happen to them, man, that's their problem, right? That's their affair. As a matter of fact, they're not even bad things, because if they really understood matters, they would see that losing their job is not the calamity that they think it is. And now, is this really Stoic? Is this how the sage would act? No, it's not even how somebody who understands Stoicism, relatively well would act. And one way that we can think about this is thinking about, yeah, other people are mistaken, right? It's not Stoic to expect other people who haven't been studying Stoicism to be Stoics. So, non Stoics and all of us Stoic slobs who are making progress, who aren't the sage, right? We're going to get things wrong in our lives. And most people are, in fact, from the Stoic perspective, mistaken about what they value, whether it's genuinely good or bad. And then they're wrong in their responses and how they look at them and orient themselves towards them and what they prioritize. So they end up feeling negative emotions and they end up making wrong choices and they end up suffering and they end up doing the wrong things and they do build bad habits. All of that is real. Whether or not they should be doing that, that's a different matter. So, you could say to them, if you're consistent enough not to be a hypocrite yourself in doing so, which I wouldn't claim to, oh, I've got some good news for you. You're not really suffering. You just got matters wrong. If you saw things rightly, well, you wouldn't be upset anymore. You'd see that the things that you think are harms are just indifferent matters. They don't affect the core of who you are unless you allow them to. But the people that are upset over things that Stoics call indifference, they're actually upset. They actually do experience these negative emotions. That's real, and they are harmed in various ways. Even a Stoic who wants to, mistakenly put other people aside could recognize that by getting things wrong, they are harming themselves in the core of who they are, and their responses will gradually make them, what Stoics consider vicious. Let's take an extreme example. Some homeless person who has been taking care of an animal, a dog or a cat or something like that, has had the animal taken from them and euthanized by the local police and animal control. And you're sitting there and they're telling you about it with tears coming down their face, just sobbing. Are you going to actually tell them, oh, you haven't really been harmed and your pet hasn't really been harmed either? Life is an indifference. No, this is a genuine harm to that person, and there's an injustice that has been imposed on them and their animal, a relationship that has been forcibly broken. And I think there's something inhuman to expecting others to behave as Stoics when they haven't been studying or practicing it. So if you think about Epictetus's advice, and he's very helpful with this sort of thing, he will say, your friend has had a loss in their family, go and grieve with them. You can actually groan with them outwardly. Just don't groan inwardly. It's okay. And actually, it's the right thing. It's a duty. It's a office. It's a appropriate act to go and grieve with those who are sad. So there's that aspect. And then I think to wrap this up, there's several considerations that come straight from Stoic philosophy that we can mull over in order to become better Stoics. So I'm going to give you three, but there's many more of these that we could think of. The Stoics think of us as rational beings, and being a rational being means having a social nature, not being an individualist, not being somebody who sets other people aside, but somebody who exists in a fabric of relationships with other beings, from individuals, that we're, say, in a household with or friendly relationships with, all the way up to humanity as a whole. So that's one consideration. Another is that if we think that virtue is, the most important of the goods, justice is one of those virtues. And justice is, by its very nature, something that extends to others and has to do with arrangements within society, our interactions with other people. And then the third thing is, and I see some people asking questions about this, indifference actually do matter. They have some value. They just don't have the same kind of value as virtue and vice do. But they're pretty damn important from a Stoic perspective if you actually look closely at the Stoic text. So let's think about each of these for just a moment in turn. with our social nature, I'm sure probably all of you have seen the diagrams coming from Heracles' elements of ethics with the famous circles, and you're supposed to extend the circles outward. That's standard Stoic teaching. So we should feel affection for people, which includes compassion, care, concern, and this should extend outward to other people who we maybe don't know, people overseas even. And it doesn't matter whether they are wrong in their perspective on the loss of this thing or that thing. We should recognize that they are suffering. The other thing I want to point out on this is that the Stoics, if you read Arius Didymus, they consider friendship to be among the good things. So it's up there with virtue. And friendship encompasses a whole range of relationships, from what we normally think of as friendship to acquaintanceship to hospitality to kinship, even erotic love. So that's one thing. Then the second thing, justice as a virtue. It's not just an inward disposition. It's not something that we keep to ourselves. By justice's very nature, it extends outward to other people. And it tells us how we ought to behave in relation to them. And being, kind of a uncompassionate jerk, that is not justice, right? It's also something that exists between us human beings and in On Duties, which is, Cicero telling us what the Stoics actually think about the virtues. He points out that leaving other people to be victims of others' injustice, that's injustice on our part. If my kid comes to me and says, I'm being bullied at school, the right Stoic response is not for me to say, oh, well, these are not things within our control. You're going to have to toughen up or something like that. Injustice is being done, and I actually have a duty to oppose that. The last thing, the indifference, and I've actually done entire talks about why the indifference are not things we should be indifferent to. So there's a lot more to be said here. Cicero points out again in On the Ends that the virtues, what do they actually bear upon? They bear upon things that are not indifference, and they're not indifference, but much of the practice of the virtues has to do with how we deal with the indifference: prudence, justice, courage, and temperance, right? Each of those applies to this vast range, and other people are among those, right? Our relationships with them and what we can do for them. Epictetus, and here's where I'll just end, he actually tells us that the essence of good is a certain comportment of our proeresis, that of the evil, another kind. So what are external things? They're materials for the proeresis. In dealing with it, it'll find its proper, its idion, specific good or evil. And what is it that gets us there? Judgments, dogmata about the materials. If we get them right, well, they make the moral purpose good. If they're crooked and screwed up, then they make it evil. And I would go so far as to say that thinking that Stoicism demands that we be indifferent to the sufferings of others, to bad things happening to them. Even if we want to say, well, it's not truly a bad thing, that would be an incorrect judgment. And that would make us bad as a result. If we want to be good Stoics, we have to recognize that care and concern for others is part of that. So that's all I've got for you. Phil, you want to do the Q&A, or
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff here.
Yeah, Greg, I think one of the things is I think we think some of us come to Stoicism because we're trying to get our own emotions under control, right? We're trying
Yeah.
to flourish and not be embrace everyone else's panic. And what you're getting is like that next level of, wait a second, well, how can I be a good human being and do this? Right? I mean, I just heard you say, I think I don't need to be looking at someone else saying, you need to be more stoic. I mean, for example, what I heard you say was, and you did not say this, but what I heard you say was, a stoic does not look at someone else and says, get over it. That isn't what we're
That's
trying
right. Yeah. And I think this is where prudence enters in, right? We often laud these Stoic virtues, and we don't think about, well, what does this actually demand of me? So this would be a case in point. somebody else is having an emotional reaction, and their emotional reaction is excessive, and it's based on some mistaken judgments about the nature of human beings and reality and what's good and bad and stuff like that. So I don't have to co-sign the whole emotional reaction, right? And I don't actually have to like feel if they're being anxious about something. I don't have to have an emotional contagion and be just as anxious as they are. I don't even have to be anxious at all in order to address the fact that they are anxious and that it's not good for them to feel that way, and that I can actually do something about that. If the anxiety can be allayed in part by telling them something, or even just like putting your hand on somebody's shoulder, I think that's the right Stoic thing to do. But again, we go to the Epictetus. You can groan outwardly, just don't groan inwardly with that person. And there is one remark about emotions that I saw in here that I did want to address. There's so many things here. It was something about emotions aren't really good or bad. Well, from a Stoic perspective, that's not true. The Stoics actually have like classifications. There are
Anger.
there are emotions that are bad. Why? Because they're making us unhappy, miserable, right? And they often tend to lead to excessive reactions or screwed up prioritizations on our part. And then there are emotions that are good. And recognizing that, that's important. So we shouldn't pretend as if like, yeah, emotions don't have any ethical value. That said, just because you lapse into anger or sadness or something like that, that doesn't suddenly like take you off the Stoic path and all is lost or anything like that's normal. That's what's going to happen to us. We want to figure out how we can progressively steer ourselves to having the better emotions and having, if not, Stoicism is not about repressing emotions, it's about understanding your emotions and then getting better at feeling less and less of, say, anger or contempt for other people or stuff like that. And if we want to help other people towards that kind of comportment when they're feeling crappy, that's not the time to say to them, oh, if you were just stoic, this would all fall into
Yeah.
place. We can represent that to them. We can model that, us, again, stoic schmucks. We're not sages, right? We're the pro culture.
Is that what I am before I'm a sage? I'm just a stoic schmuck. I think I could embody that. Really, I get it. I mean, I get it. I always say I'm a struggler, right? I mean, I'm
That's a
with
good
you.
translation too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a struggler like the rest of you, and I want this to be good. I want to flourish, but sometimes I still feel bad, and sometimes I have inappropriate responses to other people. But
Yeah.
I hopefully never lose the idea that I want to be a good human being, and that a lot of times involves me bringing other people's into my circle, bringing them closer, helping them get over what they're doing as well. Greg
Yeah, and we
Sadler, I
and
think
we
this.
do that
Oh,
through
go ahead.
concern, right? We do that
Yeah.
by engaging with them rather than being standoffish and being like, your problems aren't my problems, buddy."
I know, right, right, right. And see, you had me on the same thing. Being from Milwaukee, I'm sure you've heard, "Not my circus, not my monkeys," and it's a very common phrase. But
Yep.
I think that, yeah, I think it's how can I be a good human with you, and what does it, well, how can I solve for being a good human being in this spot? What does that look like, and how can I do this? And by the way, somebody asked this question here. I'm going to let you come back and tap on this one last time, because there was the difference between sympathy and empathy, and I heard you adumbrated in that spot, but you didn't actually say it out loud.
Yeah, this is one of those things where there is no like official difference between sympathy, empathy, compassion, all these, psychological terms. It depends on whose theory you're using, right? So a lot of people will like say, "Oh, there's two kinds of empathy," but then others will say there's four kinds. So we don't want to worry too much about that. We want to think about what is the reality that we're concerned with. And I actually used a different term, emotional contagion,
Mm,
and that's another one that's used in the
yeah,
psychological and
right.
philosophical literature. Some people think that in order to be, whatever you want to call it, compassionate, sympathetic, empathetic, I have to be feeling the same thing that you're feeling. And that's just not the case.
That's
I
right.
can understand the situation that you're in, even if I'm not like from the same background, haven't experienced the same thing. That's one cool thing about us human beings is that we're capable of that. And the emotion that should go along with that, I would say, is one of the Stoic good emotions. What we often translate as caution, eulabeia, could be translated as concern, and concern for the other person and how it is that they're feeling. So, again, to use example of my kids getting bullied, right? Now I can relate to that. We all can, right? Because we all got bullied at one point or another, and probably some of us did some bullying as well. And I'll admit that I certainly did. Um, it's
I
not,
wasn't big enough for that. I'm just going to say it. I wasn't tall enough to pull that off. Go ahead.
to bully.
Yeah.
You just got to find some shorter people. Um,
That's the problem.
but we don't have to have like had exactly the same experience to be able to say, oh man, that sucks for you. What could we do? What would help you out in this situation? um, Maybe I need to go in and take a stand, with the authorities or something like that. Maybe nobody will do anything. Well, then I can at least express the fact that, yeah, that sucks. And I don't have to, as a Stoic, say, well, strictly from a Stoic perspective, no harm has befallen you, right? I mean, that's not the time and place to do that. Maybe that'll happen later on as as we draw upon the connection that we formed with the person, we can guide them into that. But in the moment, we want to actually say, yeah, that sucks, that's wrong, that's unjust.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. Listen, I could let you suck me down into another rabbit hole because I got more questions of my own, and maybe we'll get to do that another time. But let's let these folks get a chance to chat with each other and reflect upon some of these ideas. So first off, applause for our pal Greg Sadler here. Thank you for doing this. Everybody, put this up here. Greg,
Thanks.
I want to let you pull here, get you a little quiet so that you can do your thing. And then first off, we're going to do this thing called breakout rooms. We're going to put you in small groups. I'm going to give you some more orientation because I want this to go well. I want this to be a good experience for you. The question that Greg gave me, and I think this is a great one to get you started. And by the way, I will type this a couple of times. I want to stick it here right now. Here is the question we would like you to consider. What does a genuine response of philanthropia? I don't know how about that pronunciation. Love, affection. What does a genuine response require of us when other people are suffering? What does that require of us? So if we're trying to uh, exemplify that feeling, right? If we're trying to be this person that we're trying to be, this philanthropic person, we're trying to show philanthropia, then the question is, what does that look like when we're in other people? And what is a situation in which we think we can execute that? What does that look like? Hello, nice people. Okay. Um, so in the chat, I think there've been some notes inside the chat. All right, groups. Talk to me. You could see, you could hear, you had conversations. Just give me a quick thumbs up on that part. The breakout room part of this thing was actually working. That's excellent. That got us started the way we wanted to get it started. Um, Anybody got something they want to share out of their room? This thing they heard, something that they thought struck them, or was this an easy question? Was it a hard question? Lydia, I jumped her right away, and she said, "This was a hard question. I had to think, and it was not always easy for us." So, anybody else want to share? A hand up is the way you're going to show me that, and well, you could do the hand up, but the digital hand up is the way you really help me. That, by the way, is under the reactions button, and I see we got somebody with you already. But if you get on the reactions button, hit raise hand. I'm going to grab a couple of these and just ask you to kind of share. And oh, is it Rogine? I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
just like it looks. I hope I didn't dominate too much, but well, anyway, it was helpful. I'm a refugee from fundamentalist evangelical Christianity from decades ago. But I live in the mountains of northern Arizona in a very polarized community. And trying to be an emergency response person as the person who greets people on the first line of
Yeah.
referral. And, I just realized from the conversation that some of my evangelical background has been creeping in. What I
Sure.
say to people doesn't need to be leading to Stoicism per se.
Yeah. I would
Um,
just like to say, having grown up myself in that space, we were not naturally nice to people. That wasn't right. We were right. We weren't happy. We weren't helpful. We were right. That was the vibe that we put off right all the time. So I completely get that, and I thank you for sharing that because I don't think I would have popped up in my own thinking, but it is part of it, right? We just, and I will tell you that as I've gotten older, as I've gotten more into Stoicism and gotten more into thinking philosophically, I am trying again to solve for flourishing, solve for being happy, solve for being helpful and being a good human to being other people. But what I spent a good part of my life going door to door telling people they were going to hell and just being right. And so that was not what I'm trying to do right now. Thank you, Rogine, for sharing that with us. All right, I'm going to go to Cynthia. Ask Cynthia to share. Cynthia, what did you get? What did you hear? What did you say?
A gentleman, I believe he's from Switzerland. His name escapes me, and I apologize. Is that sometimes when we do help or care for others, sometimes we lose ourselves in the process. That we
Absolutely.
care too much,
Sure.
and how do we bounce back to self?
Yeah, so I want to be a good human, but I don't want to get lost in all of that, right? And how do I balance it? And how does Stoicism help me to do that? I think those are great questions. In fact, you know what? I might even ask Greg if he wants to jump in on an answer part of that. He ought to be doing a piece of this. Can you unmute yourself, or do I have to do that? I think you can do it.
Yeah, I think that is a very important consideration, and it does kind of tie into something that we were talking about in our group. So there is that tendency, especially for those of us who are like maybe say raised as carers, to do too much and to ignore ourselves. And I think this is where something like the ethics of care can come in, which is a whole, moral theory that got worked out from about the 1980s onward, where they talk about balancing self and other. In our group, I forget who said it. There was this really great insight at the end um, about sometimes our responses to other people are driven more by what's kind of still messed up in us. So it could be like indifference to them.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to engage, but it could also be like, oh, I make myself too easily, um, exploitable, or I'm a people pleaser or something like that.
Yeah. Super easy to go down that pathway, isn't it? Yeah. I think
Well,
that's
and
great.
I think that's also a matter of like culture and habits too, right? So both of you taught, or you and I forget who it was just earlier was
Cynthia.
talking,
Cynthia.
yeah, getting away from like this cultural background
Oh,
where
Rogine. Yeah. Right.
certain values are being pushed constantly, and you internalize those values, right? And that I think none of us come to Stoicism or any other philosophy of life as a blank slate. We all come in with our background, and we come in as kind of screwed up, and we want to become less screwed up in the process. So I think that's probably enough for me.
Yeah, that's absolutely the truth. All right, I'm going to take just one more, and by the way, I don't want anyone to feel bad about this. There's just not enough time to do it because I do want to get you into breakout rooms one more time before we get gone today. But I'm going to take Adrian's question because I saw him next, and I ask him to unmute and ask him to tell us what he heard or said inside his room.
Yeah, I thought it was depending on who you are and what context you're in. So are you basically in a professional role, either with a patient or a client? You'll behave in one way. Are you relating to your children, to your spouse, to your parents, or other family members? Or are you just relating to people you meet at work or people you meet on the street? Your response will be very, very different. And I think I recollect Henry David Thoreau saying if he knew that someone was going to come and help him, he'd get up and run off as fast as he could. And how do you help people without producing dependency? So, in other words, people who help get something out of it themselves. They almost like getting someone dependent upon them. But how do you help someone and actually put them back on their own feet and not being dependent upon you? And also, I think certainly in the UK with with the benefit system and the welfare state, how does the state help people without producing dependency on the state and dependency on government? And so you have generations of a family who all of them are on benefit, who never actually get jobs, who all, in other words, helping people actually can make the problem worse rather than making the problem better. It's
Yeah,
a very
I
good
just,
question.
oh, it's that, and what a great insight into that as well, right? I mean, how can I be helpful without creating this dependency? And of course, that's partly related to me and partly related to them. And how do I keep that relationship where I want it to be? I think that's very powerful, and it's something we got to figure out. How do we want that? What does it mean? What is our role in this space to be like that? Adrian, that was wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you for the insight. Won't get to the rest of these. Sorry about that for right now, but you might get you on the next round as we go around. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you another question, and we're going to put you into the rooms and let you try this out again with a new question. And by the way, we're going to shuffle the deck in between, just because part of the role of this thing is to get you to meet new people. So actually, I'm telling you what, I'm going to put the question up here, and then I'm going to ask Greg to come back and just explain the question for a second, maybe help people get a little bit around it. But if we do think that we should respond with help, sympathy, care, concern for others who are suffering or wronged, are there legitimate limits to how far we should go with our response? Greg, you want to put anything else around that question? Don't forget to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes in part to that question of like, are we doing too much or are we creating dependency? But it's also, I was thinking about Cicero in this, where he's like, you got to evaluate your priorities. You can't just be Mr., Mrs., or whatever. I give everything to everybody all the time, because you've got limited amounts of attention and care and actions that you can do. So how do you prioritize? Like maybe in some cases, you can only help one person. That's it.
Yeah.
So what guidelines, I guess you could say, like, what guidelines do you find helpful for figuring this out?
Right. No, I think that's right. And I love it. And I'll tell you too, in this space, if you haven't gone back and read On Duties in a while, that's a great thing to go back and give yourself a rubric for that very thing to figure out what that would be. The same as before, I'm going to put you in rooms of roughly 4 people. Remember, we're from all over. Remember, your job in here is to be a good human being and ask good questions and hopefully meet some new people. It is not to extend your business practice, whatever that might be. I don't know. We're not doing that. We're just meeting people, and we're hopefully gathering some great ideas on how we can approach some of the things that we're working on. So ask good questions. That's what I'm telling you. Well, hello, nice people. Again, welcome back. All right. It looks like that went a little bit better than the first time, even. We kind of got that figured out. You could see, you could hear, you had good conversations. Give me a thumbs up if you're the cat that thinks we did this okay. All right. That's really good. I like you know what? Here, Jim says, by the way, these 9-minute sessions feel very short. You know what? I love it. I love it when you say they feel short, because if you came back and said that was too long, I'd say, well, that's terrible. I don't want you to be off in a spot where you're not having a good time and not learning from people, not enjoying the conversations. So the question was, what are the limits, or what do we think the limits or should be? And I wonder if people had answers to that. Anybody want to raise a hand? I see Stoic Dan with a hand up. Joe Bullock has got a hand up. I'm going to take a few of these, not a lot of them, but I'll take a few and see what you said here. So let me start, and I think it's going to be Dan's first here. Pop. All right, Dan. Hello,
Yeah,
friend.
briefly, we were in room 11 and discussing the boundaries of care. One person described that if someone has reached that boundary or that limit, that you should be able to communicate it to them, staying calm, of course, not adding to the fire, but communicate that you have reached your limit and that perhaps you are there to care for someone, but they are being irritable about it. So that's an interesting boundary level.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think that's powerful. I think we can always say what I need from you is, right? And that's kind of what that next bit. So I can do this. I'm here to do. All right, Joe, Linda, Tim. Let's see how many of these I can take. Let's go ahead. Joseph Bullock.
So really quickly, the first point was just to balance between self-care and maximizing your ability to care for others.
Right.
So like that's a first part. The second part that was really the point was not to jump in and have to solve the problem for the individual. And that's also a good boundary to set. But also to listen as well, and to not minimize anybody else's problem. But to also not over empathize
Yeah.
with the individual. Anyway, so I'll leave it
Yeah.
there. Thank you.
Very good, Joe. Thank you for sharing that. Linda, see if I can get you to unmute and talk to us for a second.
All right, I'm unmuted. We had a great discussion tying it into the four virtues. And we again talked about what the first two folks mentioned about knowing your boundaries to where you're not affecting your own equilibrium, so to speak, by doing too much where you don't have the capacity. But what was interesting was looking at the four virtues and fortifying yourself. That term came up a lot, like in the area of resilience or temperance. Kind of training yourself to recognize when it's too much, when you're doing too much, when it's affecting you and your ability to see clearly. And then how that can sometimes intersect with courage, because you want to dive in and help where others won't, but then do you have the capacity to do it? And then we kind of ended with, I think I remember reading that the definition of enchiridions is on hand, which is having your tools on hand, like what we're doing here, to be on hand to prepare yourself for helping and knowing your own capacity. So it was a really good discussion.
Linda, thank you for sharing that. And I'm gratified to hear, right? You never know if this is working and you're all off in your rooms doing your thing. I'm glad to hear that that was a good conversation. It sounds like it was very thoughtful as well. And that's the kind of people I want to hang around. All right, Kai is next. I'm going to ask Kai. Here's the thing, Kai, you have to raise your hand back because I lost you. Yeah, there you are. So don't lower your hand when I do this, because then you drop on my screen and I lose you. All right, so I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Okay, so there are only two in our group. It's me and Mark Johnson. So we think that helping others is not that straightforward, because sometimes we want to help, it's legitimate, lawful, but we kind of maybe lost confidence to want to go forward and help. And it end up like we become a bystander. We just stand around and see. But the truth is that we don't have confidence. So in a way, there's a trade-off. So it's about understanding what you are good at and using the best that you can to really help others appropriately. That way you can use the best of your skills and you give others the best as well. Thank you.
Look at that. I love it. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Alex.
Hi, I just want to add, we had a marvelous discussion, and it was one of the situations when it was too short because one of our members ended up being cut off. Anyway, we also talked about boundaries and stuff, but we also touched on how to not create dependency of when you help somebody. And luckily, the experience of the people in a group, we all get to the conclusion that the best way is just let them have a control of a solution of that problem. You just give advice and let them decide what to do. So far, that seems like the best way to not create dependency. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for sharing that. Danielle is next on my list. So I'm going to ask Danielle to unmute.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to mention that one of the things I think might be helpful also is the idea of not coming with too much of your personality in your interactions when you're trying to help someone. Because if you come in with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and you might want to solve other people's problems or apply your own thoughts about it. And oftentimes people are trying to figure it out themselves and have their own understanding. And maybe you can help them being a good listener and maybe asking them questions and helping them figure things out. But to try to have as little of yourself in there as possible might be a way to be more helpful, actually.
I love that advice, but what if you're as awesome as me, right? And I got to tell everybody my ideas about everything. I think, that I get to live in a world where I hang around some really cool tech people and they always feel like they have the answers and they want to lean forward with the answer before they even ask the right question to figure out what the problem was. And so I love that idea of asking really good questions and getting that part figured out first, right? And maybe if you're really, really good at this, you never offer an answer. You just ask enough questions that they go figure it out on their own, right? I love it, Daniel. Great. Well done. James is up. James Southwood. If there's more than one James, I don't know. There's a few hands up here.
Well, I'll take that cue. The roll of the dice was good enough to give us on our room an academic, a physician, and a sports coach, that being me, who are able to say that sometimes you can be a practitioner who can see that the help that someone needs, whether they be a student, a patient, or an athlete, isn't the help that would be kindest to give them. And sometimes you can see what someone needs and know that it's kindest to do things a different way. So it comes back to requiring a personal ethic or virtue or wisdom to guide you in the kindest way to help someone, especially if you are an experienced helper.
Right.
So it comes back to needing to read the works in one's own case.
Yeah. What a thoughtful answer to that, right? I mean, take a moment, think about where you actually fit in all of this and where they fit in this and what that's going to be. I love it. Thank you, James. Tim, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And you can't lower your hand. I go to press that button and I lost you. Where are you? There you are. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
There we go. Okay. The two main things that we discussed, the first one that a lot of other people said is knowing yourself and knowing your own limits and understanding what you can do and what you can't. The other one that we discussed was our roles and the role that we have in relation to that person also to help define those limits. So the limits that I have to a random person on the street might be different than my wife versus my siblings, et cetera. And so that's what helps define the limits, is what specific role we have in relation to that person, as well as knowing what we can safely give to that person as opposed to what we need to do to maintain ourselves. Because again, you can't light yourself on fire to keep the world warm.
No, that certainly is not going to work, is it? Excellent. All right. I love all of that. Listen, we're close on time. Let me do one thing, and I'll hang around. I will drag the end of this, as we say, to hang out a little bit. But I'm going to ask Greg to unmute one more time. And can't actually see you on the screen for reasons of I just don't know where you are. Maybe if you start talking.
Sure. Have I appeared now or not?
There you go. I can see you.
Okay.
So first off, I want to say thanks again. What is it? You must have something else going on today. It seems to me when we first set this up, he's like, oh, Phil, I got a bunch of things going on. I need to make sure I can fit this in my schedule. I'm super glad that you were able to do it. What's next in your day?
Well, it's not Stoicism related. I've actually got a couple different things. So Worlds of Speculative Fiction. One of the things that I do is this monthly series, and we're talking about this great sword and sorcery series from the 1930s by Catherine Moore, centered on this character, Jirel of Jory. And then the next thing that I'm actually doing after that is not public at all. I'm heading out to Lapham Peak State Park, and I'm going to hike around and immerse myself in some beautiful nature for a while. And then the last thing I have to do is take an online course that's supposed to last about 4 hours so that I can become a volunteer at the Almost Home Cat Rescue here in Milwaukee. So kind of an idiosyncratic set of things going on my end.
The thing is, I'm glad to hear you got so many cool things going on, and that kind of gets us to understand that you're a whole person, and I get that too. All right, here's what I want to do.
Not just the thing on the screen.
Not just this guy here, not just the philosopher on YouTube. Okay, so what I'm going to do, this is a little trick that I like to play. I've never seen anybody else do this, so I'm the cat that's going to ask you all to do this. And we're all going to thank Greg for doing this thing today. I've given you the amazing and awesome power to unmute. And what we're going to do is all together say thank you, right? And I will count you down. 3, 2, 1.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Greg.
Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you.
Maraming salamat.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Okay. Good luck with the cats.
Thank you.
I love it.